At the moment, a man called Zuhdi Jasser is in Australia. He's described as a Muslim reformist. He's the son of Syrian parents who fled their homeland, a former US Navy officer, and the founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. He's here for what have been described as those hard-to-have conversations with Muslim and non-Muslim community leaders and academics. Tonight and tomorrow, Dr. Jasser is speaking in Melbourne, and on Saturday, March 16, he'll speak at the University of Sydney. All the details, including how to book, and I'll give these to you, are Vicky Jansen, V-I-C-K-I-E, Jansen, Janson.com.au. I'll give all that to you later. VickyJansen.com.au. Dr. Jasser has joined me from the studio of our sister station, 3AW in Melbourne. Good morning to you, Dr. Jasser.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Not
it's
at
an
all.
honor to be in Australia.
Well, welcome here. Now, we'll talk about the visit in a moment. Tell us about yourself. Your parents fled your homeland of Syria. Why did they leave?
Yeah, they left in '66. My grandfather was a businessman, newspaperman, and had been put in prison in '63 when the Baathists, which is Assad's party, took over. My father finished medical school and escaped to Lebanon. Had been educated in London and loved Western democracy, so came to the United States and got political asylum a few months after arriving.
Just tell us about this Baathist party, though. What were they doing in Syria at the time?
So the Baathists are Bashar Assad's party, which is the National Socialist Fascist Party. There were 20 different coups between 48 and 63 when the French pulled out. And ultimately, the last coup was the Baathists that took over. The Baathists are the similar party as Saddam Hussein. In Syria, it gave rise to Hafez and Bashar Assad. It's similar to Egypt's National Democratic Party. All of these Arab tin pot dictators are really fascists that run an Arabist fascist type of political party.
Yeah.
And now you see what's happening since 2011. I wish my father and grandfather were alive to see what the Syrian people are trying to do. Unfortunately, civil society is so destroyed over generations that you take away evil and you end up with even more sometimes, as you saw with ISIS.
Absolutely. Well, of course, that was the Great Spring Offensive, wasn't it? I don't know actually what the Spring Offensive achieved other than giving rein to more of these fascist people. You joined the US Navy and attended the Medical College of Wisconsin on a Navy scholarship and then became a doctor in 1992. What made you join the Navy?
Well, I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin. My parents were able to teach me a version of Islam that they couldn't have done anywhere else in Muslim-majority countries. So I grew with a passion for loving America and felt that there was a duty to serve. I was on a Navy scholarship through medical school. And, we see all these jihadis wanting to die for jihad. My family taught me that the only thing I'd ever want to die for is the United States, the Constitution, and a people that provided us the freedom to choose whichever pathway of faith, of personal freedom and business that we wanted to, and not be forced by a theocracy or by government. So I felt the duty to serve as a physician.
That is a beautiful sentiment. Now, you and your family have been described as devout Muslims. How do you define a devout Muslim?
That's a great question. This is interesting in that sometimes faith is unfortunately divided by what you put around your head or how open and demonstrative you are of your identity as a Muslim. But to me, faith is belief in God, belief in the core value systems, the family values, the roots of being moral, humble, having integrity, prayer, reading scripture. So devout to me is fasting in Ramadan, is believing that every person I treat, God judges me how I do that, that ultimately it's not society that should force me or not to do what I want to do, but rather my own personal piety. So
against that, what's a radical Muslim?
A radical Muslim is somebody who believes that not only does he have a faith, but it's enforced coercively through whatever means necessary to others, either through the exploitation of government law, through the institutionalization of Sharia or Islamic law as a tool of the government, and that ultimately it is not a choice, but rather not to live in freedom, but rather to establish an Islamic state or a caliphate, which is a combination of Islamic states.
So how do people get radicalized?
Yeah, radicalization is a long process. This is one of the problems with the conversation in the West is we sort of look at these guys and say, oh, he seems so normal. I wonder how he became a radical. They don't self-combust. The beginning process is a separatism where groups, leaders, imams start to tell our communities that this country is against them, that they're victims. They become basically estranged, segregated in their mindset, in their consciousness, and they don't belong to the community. Then that separatism consciously turns into a sense of trying to find redemption, believing that their faith will overcome, and they develop a cause that they want to die for, which is jihad. So that jihadization is a second part of the process, and then ultimately some of them remain nonviolent, others become violent and not only wear the jersey, but want to get on the field and begin to kill others through joining groups like Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and others. But we have to remember, it's not just the jihadization. These states, whether it be Saudi Arabia, the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, the Khomeinists of Iran, these are state-sponsored Islamic jihadist states that also inculcate radicalization.
Well, in the wake of September 11 attacks in 2001, you and a group of American Muslims formed the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and you said that you and other like-minded people felt that the Muslim establishment that claims to speak on behalf of your people is actually the problem. Just explain that and amplify that if you could.
Yeah, I think the context, as an American, we talked about President Trump fighting the establishment, which is the swamp. If you can use the same analogy in the Islamic world, the clerics, the imams, the governments are all this establishment, which is a power structure that controls through billions of what I call petro-Islam spread around the world, has created a very monolithic interpretation of Islam, which even in the West we see dominating our mosques. Why? Because the texts, the publishing companies, the interpretations and translations of the Quran and the versions of the Hadith, which is the stories of the Prophet, are really monolithic. They come from either Saudi Arabia's theocracy or Al-Azhar University in Cairo or the Khomeinists in Iran. So that simple establishment is the problem. You meet many Muslims, they're moral, they reject some of the theocracy, but yet they've not developed publishing houses, they've not developed a sense of courage, if you will, to stand up against. They're sort of like the silent Germans in Germany that did not adopt Nazism, but yet did very little to fight the establishment of the regime.
Quite. So talking about fighting, you were the co-founder of the Muslim Reform movement, calling for what I've seen described as a Muslim Reformation. How do you achieve that?
That's a great question. So it's not going to happen overnight. Ultimately, we need to develop the end goal, if you will, at the end of the field is to develop a new Sharia, a new Islamic interpretation of law that's in the 21st century. So that new school of thought is going to have to be done by imams that are schooled in Sharia, but that can't happen overnight. The process is the first step is the separation of mosque and state, the belief that we as Muslims reject any Islamic state identity or Islamic flags and reject the Sharia state. And just as the American Revolution and Western revolutions understood in the Bible to render unto Caesar what is Caesar and unto God's what is God's, we in Islam need to begin to marginalize our clerical leadership into just the mosques and into universities and begin to take back our public square away from them. And just as, the Saudis will say, well, Jasser's talking about a bid'ah, which is an invention. Well, if they take in science, they take in new computer technology, they sure can take in new political science. And the question is not what Muhammad did in the 7th century, but what would he do if he were alive today? And I believe he would reject any armed jihad. He would reject Islamic militaries and Islamic states.
Good on you. We could talk forever. Wonderful stuff. We wish you well, and I thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Extraordinary, not at all. Dr. Jasser. There he is. And, of course, he's written a book called A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith.